Welcome. In this video produced by the Home Vaccine Education Network, we're going to talk about the measles vaccine and herd immunity. In 2014, after years of intensive measles vaccination and re-vaccination campaigns, achieving 3 to 4 doses of vaccine in over 95% of the population, the measles virus was officially eliminated from Mongolia. Measles infections had been rare for the last 13 years, and now they were completely non-existent. But the party was short-lived. Only 1 year later, in March 2015, 2 cases were reported near the long border with China. Public health officials scrambled into action, but it was too late. The infection had already spread towards the capital city. In the end, it would officially sicken over 49,000 and kill over 100 babies. The vast majority of the ill were young infants and adults, 2 groups who are especially vulnerable to measles mortality and complications, as opposed to school-aged children in whom measles infections usually resolve without incident. According to the theory of herd immunity by vaccination, an outbreak in such a highly vaccinated population should not have occurred. Here we illustrate why. In most circumstances, the measles virus will spread, on average, to 20 contacts of each infectious individual. Here we color infectious individuals red, susceptible individuals blue, and immune individuals yellow. If over 95% of the population is successfully immunized through vaccination, then on average each infectious individual should infect less than one other. In epidemiology, the average number of individuals who are infected by each infectious individual is termed Rn. Thus, Rn should have been less than 1, and chains of infection should have died off on their own. In fact, this must have occurred within the population of 2 to 10-year-old children in Mongolia, because their rates of infection were very low. The problem is that this herd immunity is not sustained when vaccinated children reach adulthood. Over time, after vaccination or natural infection, the body produces fewer antibodies. This is known as waning immunity. After natural infection, however, the antibody levels are so high that they remain high enough to prevent acute disease over a lifetime. But a vaccine virus is not the same as a wild virus. The mutated vaccine virus is specifically designed to create a lesser acute illness, and the body will respond with a smaller immune response. The current measles vaccine triggers the creation of about 9 times fewer antibodies than natural illness. Clinical studies indicate that by age 20, about 50% of fully vaccinated individuals do not have enough antibodies to prevent measles infection. Thus, within 20 years after the introduction of intensive measles vaccination campaigns, the population as a whole no longer has herd immunity. The very same adults who fell ill by the thousands from measles in Mongolia had escaped measles infection as children in an epidemic 14 years earlier. At that time, they had been recently vaccinated and still had high enough antibody levels. 14 years later, they did not. And studies have shown that once an individual has been successfully vaccinated, revaccination usually provides a very short-term boost. Remember, many of the young adults in Mongolia had been vaccinated 3 to 4 times. More and more boosters are also an ineffective solution in an adult population because too many older individuals are immunocompromised due to chemotherapy, autoimmune disease, advanced age, or other conditions. Immunocompromised individuals cannot be vaccinated safely or effectively with live virus vaccines. A study in New York, for example, found that over 4% of the population was severely immunocompromised, while 19% had some degree of immunosuppression. Add to this the 3% of the population which routinely experiences vaccine failure, and it is clearly impossible to achieve herd immunity by re-vaccinating a population that includes adults. But there is an interesting hitch. Even if they have very low antibody levels, individuals who contracted measles after being vaccinated often have a different immunological response than unvaccinated individuals. Symptoms of so-called vaccine-modified measles may appear to be more benign in the acute stage, depending on the individual and immune system's strength. But long-term immune dysfunction is suggested by the data after this infection. Increases in type 1 diabetes showed up in American adolescents who may have had vaccine-modified disease. Higher rates of atopic dermatitis and asthma showed up in other children who contracted measles after immunization, although causation is not clear in this case. The condition of vaccine-modified measles is usually at least less contagious than regular measles, leading to reduced spread of illness. But at the same time, symptoms may not appear to be measles at all, creating a source of infection which cannot easily be detected and traced by public health. And individuals with modified measles may infect young babies with measles without knowing it. In case after case of measles resurgence in different countries, the high infection rates of vulnerable young infants is heartbreaking. Argentina achieved 96.5% measles vaccine coverage in 1993, only to have an outbreak with 15,000 confirmed cases in 1997. But most of the school children were safely ensconced in herd immunity. They did not fall ill. 87% of the cases were 6 to 11 months old. Young babies run higher risks of both short-term mortality and long-term complications from contracting measles at too young an age. In fact, Mother Nature intends to protect young infants from measles infections. A healthy mother who has been naturally infected by measles herself normally passes enough antibodies to her baby to protect her through the first year of life. But a mother who has been vaccinated often does not have enough antibodies to protect her baby through even the first 6 months. In fact, in unvaccinated populations, herd immunity technically drives measles transmission to very low levels after an epidemic sweeps through, conferring high levels of natural immunity on the population. The low transmission usually lasts for a year until a large enough number of new babies age out of their maternal protection to create enough new hosts to the virus. The influx of susceptible young ones drives the new cycle of disease. Under mass vaccination, children are immunized as they leave maternal protection, preventing them from driving the new cycle. This works until adults experience waning immunity, and the babies of these immunized adults lose maternal protection months earlier than they should have. Then the tiny babies who are too young for their own shots can drive a new cycle of infection. In the United States in 1989, an increase in births and an increasing percentage of vaccinated mothers led to a critical number of susceptible babies. Together with adults who were becoming increasingly vulnerable because of waning immunity, the number of susceptibles breached the epidemic threshold without any decline in the vaccination rates. The rate of measles infections per year rapidly soared from several thousand to tens of thousands. In 1990, children under age 5 made up an unprecedented 48% of measles cases, with the vast majority being in infants under 1 year of age. After the measles resurgence, the United States imposed 2 rather than 1 measles vaccinations for all children. Like doing 1 round of vaccination, this does help drive down rates, but, as we saw in Mongolia, only temporarily. We are helped by the influx of immigrants who have naturally derived rather than vaccine-based immunity. But as global vaccination becomes the norm, this help is faltering. Measurements from 1999-2004, when measles rates were very low in the United States, showed that 95.9% of the population was immune, but that this immunity was lower in adults of predominantly vaccinated generations. By 2009-2010, our immunity level had dropped to 92%. Again, this did not correlate to any decline in vaccination rates, but rather to aging vaccinated adults losing their immunity. As our immunity declines, measles incidence is on the rise. Intensive tracking of infected individuals and imposition of quarantines by public health is currently keeping things in check. Furthermore, because vaccinated adults with modified illness are less contagious, we probably will not reach epidemic breakout conditions in the United States until the percentage of immune individuals drops below 90 or 85%. But this is coming. Currently in Korea and Taiwan, where over 95% of the population has been receiving 2 doses of vaccine for decades, less than 75% of the population has retained full immunity to measles. Furthermore, while babies often drive outbreaks, we cannot prevent measles outbreaks by vaccinating younger babies. Children under 1 year of age simply have lower rates of mounting an effective immune response to measles vaccine. In many countries where birth rates and measles risk are high, children as young as 9 months old are routinely vaccinated. But it has recently been shown that after 3 years, children who had their first vaccine before 12 months of age have more rapidly waning immunity than children initially vaccinated later, and the younger children cannot reach the immunity levels attained by the other children. If a child is exposed to the vaccine at too young an age, their immune system suffers a permanent deficit in its ability to mount a measles response. In fact, we don't even know whether many of these babies are capable of clearing the vaccine measles virus at all, or are harboring chronic infections. Yet children are routinely vaccinated for measles as young as 6 months old in outbreak situations and in developing countries. Children in a New York outbreak situation were recently required to be vaccinated at 6 months or their parents would have to pay a fine. This is a particularly poor long-term measles control strategy. The global population as a whole, however, seems to be soldiering on under the myth that measles vaccinations are powerful enough to provide lasting population-wide herd immunity and even disease elimination. Thus, they continue a strategy that shelters children from measles infection at exactly the age at which it is safest for them, while building a tinderbox of susceptible older individuals and babies who stand to suffer much more. And we must be aware that we are raising a generation that believes that it is high vaccination rates, not public health, that controls measles in the population. Brazil eliminated measles in 2001 and maintained a 2-dose vaccination coverage of over 95%. Lulled into a sense of false security by their high vaccination rate, public health surveillance slipped during a change in administrations in 2013, just as large numbers of tourists were arriving for the World Cup. Measles was duly reintroduced and raced through 38 cities over 20 months, seemingly unhindered by massive re-vaccination campaigns that were scrambled into place. Even more tragic is when measles epidemics hit refugee camps after natural disasters or civil unrest. Here, crowded conditions and poor nutritional status make measles vaccine even less effective because vaccine-induced levels of antibodies cannot hold up to unusually high viral loads. It is time to stop pushing the myth that measles vaccination can produce lasting herd immunity. Thank you for watching. For a fully referenced transcript, please visit us at www.homevaccineeducationnetwork.com.